is an important step for the JCB. As you know, we are not able to hold our meetings in public and at our usual location due to the government guidance on public health measures to tackle the COVID-19 emergency. Therefore, it's important we take those steps available to us to make the proceedings of this policy board open to scrutiny not only by the public, but also by other elected members, and I can advise that the recording of this meeting will be available to watch on Renfrewshire Council's website following the meeting. Although most members of the board are familiar with the basic rules to be followed for a meeting held remotely, to ensure that the meeting proceeds efficiently, there are a couple of additional points that I need to bring to your attention, and these are: firstly, it is even more important when meetings are being recorded that it's only the person who's speaking who has their microphone on. This is because on the recording, if the noise from another microphone is picked up, the picture on the recording may move to the source or sources of that noise and detract from the speaker. Secondly, for the same reason, it's important that there is a short pause between speakers to enable the camera to adjust to the new speaker. And thirdly, the content of any show conversation instant message sent on the Teams system, the little chat box on the right hand side, will be shown on the recording, so be warned. Members who are accessing by phone only should also put their phones on mute when not addressing the meeting. And before we move on to the business of the meeting, can I ask the clerk to do a roll call of members so that it is clear who is present on this recording?
From my records, I have Councillors Begg, Councillor McNaughton, Councillor Patterson and Councillor Steele present. I then have from Unison and the trade union side, I have Mark Ferguson, Margaret McIntyre, Ryan Stewart and Katie Kernahan. I also see that Councillor Hart is now in attendance, and I don't think we need to go through the officers as such, convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. We can now move on to the business at hand today. The first item on my agenda is the appointment of the chairperson. Robert, do you want to lead us on that?
Yeah, the situation is that the last meeting of the JCB was held back in September 2019. Councillor Steele was the convener on that particular day, and there is an arrangement whereby the convener alternates between the trade union side and the management side. In the circumstances where we were having the first meeting here virtually, I did approach the trade union side to ask if there was any objection to Councillor Steele being appointed as the convener for this particular meeting, and the trade union side were in agreement that that would be fine.
All right, thank you for that then. I'll chair the meeting happily then. The first item is then, is that right? Or second, I should say, are there any apologies?
We have apologies from Stephen McAllister from Unite.
Thank you. And do we have any declarations of interest?
Apologies, Councillor Steele, from Stephen Hicks from Unison. And also just to record that Lorna Glover from Unison is on the call as well.
Yep. Thank you for that. Do we have any declarations of interest? I see nothing on the chat box and I see no one attracting my attention, so I'll take no declaration of interest and move on to item 4 on our agenda, which is developments in health, safety and well-being. Who wishes to lead on this?
Councillor, I'll lead in that. It's Graham Campbell from HR and OD. The following report underlines the activities that have taken place since the last meeting and focuses on the actions and activities in support of the council's response and recovery plans. Due to the pandemic, a number of planned work streams were paused. However, we are consulting and collaborating with our trade unions, as this has been critical in ensuring the health, safety and well-being of all involved in activities during the pandemic. Number of items we have reviewed and issued a number of policies and guidance during the period. So guidance on display screen equipment, home working guidance, working in vehicles, as well as undertaking a number of hazards in the workplace, as well as workplace specific risk assessments, schools checklists and COVID age risk assessments. Throughout the period, the team continues to support our frontline services the delivery of emergency and prioritised work, with the previously mentioned guidance supporting a vast range of activities that are underway. And this has been supported and supplemented by communications for our employees and managers. The team carried out an extensive site visit programme by the end of June this year, and we visited all schools, early learning centres and nurseries during the period, and we actually repeated this process just prior to the schools opening up for the new term. Also, the team, in conjunction with HR, have been supporting employees who have underlying health conditions in their return to work safely. And in line with this, we work very closely with our partners in occupational health and our counselling services to ensure we offer appropriate support. In the recovery stage, the team have been busy reviewing the arrangements across many council buildings. And in terms of business as usual, we had suspended our formal Corporate Health and Safety Committee meetings. However, we do continue to have weekly meetings and discussions with our trade unions and service management teams. We also continue to support the procurement function and have reviewed a large number of contracted evaluations. And finally, we continue a process to process a number of freedom information requests in a timely manner. And that concludes the health and safety update, if there are any questions.
Thank you, Graham, much obliged. And just say, this was a point that was raised at the Finance Board just finished, that the work that's been done by staff during this pandemic, it just can't be praised highly enough, and it certainly isn't taken for granted. But it's pleasing to see, on top of the great reports coming back, the collaborative working that's highlighted in this report, because I think that's a crucial element of it. I think it really can't be overemphasised. I don't see any queues on the right-hand side. If anyone wishes to. Well,
can I just say, Mark Ferguson's indicated he wants in.
I don't have that. There you are now. Can I come in? It's a wee lag coming up, Mark. Sorry about that. The floor is yours, Mark.
Yeah, I used the hand function, but I don't know if that works everywhere. I mean, just to first of all mirror your comments, Councillor Steele, because I mean, there's been an enormous amount of work, both at the health and safety team and by the trade unions during this pandemic. It's been very difficult to keep up to speed with the changes in guidance and the various parts and various people, different organisations that's been involved in circulating that information. But I think overall, you know, we've worked extremely well together and round the clock. You know, it's no being business hours. Let's be very clear on that. But I think that, you know, we've kept our workers, our staff as safe as we possibly could, and the community. And I'm sure that will continue. But I mean, I do want to praise the amount of work and the collaborative work that was done, because I think it was a tremendous piece of work. And I'll come on to some others later on, but certainly with health and safety, the team have been outstanding. And I know Lorna, who's been leading from us, has worked very jointly, but she's worked in the spirit of goodwill and trying to genuinely deal with issues as they came up.
Thank you, Mark.
Here, Mark. If I could ask those who wish to make a comment to type a Q in the right-hand box rather than use the hand function, I would be most grateful, because I'm kind of back and forth between the two here. Councillor McNaughton.
Thanks, Convener. Just it's good to hear that things are, cooperating well with the trade unions on this. Did I pick up there that the health and safety committees haven't been meeting? And is there? I'd have thought in this pandemic, it's even more important to allow a formal mechanism for raising issues. Is there any proposal to reintroduce them, given that other boards are now operating?
Good.
We have run some virtual health and safety, I wouldn't say health and safety committees, we've virtual meetings with all the services on specific areas, but I will certainly take that forward in relation to, we could run a virtual corporate health and safety committee, and I'll speak to my colleagues just to make sure we get that put in place.
Thank you. Gordon, did you want to come in? Gordon Cree, that is, I should say. I saw a hand raised, disappeared.
Yeah. Thank you, Convener. It was just to echo what, just very quickly to echo what Mark from Unison had said. And on behalf of the employer, we extend our thanks out to all the trade unions, but Unison in particular. But we had some really, really challenging discussions and things to work through with all the unions, to be honest, before the schools went back. And I suppose just to echo Mark, I don't think we can underestimate. We wouldn't have been in the position that we were in had the trade unions not have been so supportive. So I would just like to put that on record, please. Well
said. I think really challenging. You've got a career in politics. Really challenging is putting it incredibly mildly.
Thank you, Convener.
If there are no other questions or comments on this, we can note this report. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is item 5 in your agenda, the absence statistic. You know what I'm trying to say. Ruth, are you coming in on this one, or is it Graham again?
Convener, it's myself again. Is that good? You get me twice in a row. So the following report on absence will advise the board of the absence stats for Q4 period January to 31st of March this year. And the report provides information on 3 kind of main key areas. The absence stats broken down by service and by category of staff, the reasons for absence by service and category of staff, and finally the progress made by services in relation to the support and attendance action plans. So looking at the absence stats, the council has recorded an overall absence rate of 3.51 days lost per FTE, and this is 0.19 days above the target figure of 2.6. Teacher absence level was 2.36 days lost per FTA, which is 0.06 days above the target of 2.3 days. And the local government employee absence level of 3.86 days lost per FTA is 1.94 days above the target. If we look at the reasons for absence and compare the same period the previous year, 2 main reasons come out similar to previous: psychological, non-work related, and musculoskeletal and joint disorders. And to address these absences, the council provided a range of support services, such as an occupational health service and Time for Talking, which is the employee counselling service. And through these services, we can offer a flexible support with example CBT for more complex issues, and also confidential support for a range of other issues. Over the period, there were 67 cases where were supported by our counselling service, and that covered a number of issues, from personal issues, work and personal issues, work-related, and finally a selection of miscellaneous others. And really, to give a wee example of the process behind these figures, if an employee was to suggest they would experience psychological non-work-related issues, then we give the opportunity to discuss with a mental health first aider, and also to be provided information to access our counselling service, Time for Talking. And if it was a work-related stress issue, we would look to complete a stress risk assessment. That would be undertaken to identify what issues they are, and then put an agreed action plan in place to work around that problem. During the period, there were also 905 appointments to an occupational health provider, and that included a range of areas from health surveillance, management referrals, and wellbeing referrals. We also continue to deliver both mindfulness and Scottish mental health first aid courses, and to raise awareness of all the issues and support available. We continue to work with Time for Talking and others to expand the scope of training and advice available. Example, looking at personal resilience, well-being, safe talk, assist, and doing well, finally looking at the depression and low mood swings. During March, we actually offered a post-traumatic stress disorder counselling service to employees who had been operating COVID support lines. And in terms of musculoskeletal joint disorders, unfortunately, we were unable to offer physiotherapy sessions as they were temporarily suspended due to the COVID controls. However, we are looking at manual handling activities, and they have been constantly reviewed and risk assessments amended accordingly. We are on course in investigating other practical options to reduce the impact of musculoskeletal and joint disorders. And finally, in the report, looking at supporting attendance and activity, there's been a number of recent and planned actions to improve absence performance through the following. We have a specialist supporting attendance team, which was set up in December 2019, with focus on employee health, employee wellbeing, and attendance at work. The HR and OD team proactively contact and support managers with absence cases of between 2 and 4 weeks. And we're also looking at interactive best practice sessions, which have been held across the Council and Health and Social Care Partnership, HR teams, and in addition to that, training for operational managers. We're also reviewing the sporting attendance policies and training, and that's ongoing with trade union collaboration. We also plan to continue to plan health promotional activities across the year. Whilst working with colleagues from business world, we're looking to improve the information we can take from that. So absence information, looking to also streamline the process, and also can we get some flagging system to look at early interventional reminders. We also have discussion with directors and their management teams on support attendance. And finally, we continue to work with the absence champions for every service, and that concludes the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I see some questions coming in. Can I ask, just before I take the questions at the side, 7.5, the presenting issue, 7.4 and 7.5, talking about time for talking. It's excellent to see that that's there. It's excellent to see the kind of things that people are perfectly prepared to come forward and talk about where they might not have done in recent years. My question is, given that this service is likely to be even more necessary, and everybody keeps jumping about, it's likely to be even more necessary in the coming months and years, given the pressures that are going to be on staff as we go through what's coming. Are you confident it's robust enough to deal with an increase in the types of numbers that we've got here?
Convener, they've been very flexible with us, and there is multiple options in contacting our counselling service. Whether it was previously a face-to-face option, but we can do virtual and telephone calls, and they are open 24/7, 365, and they can up the resources as required.
Thank you. Mark Ferguson, followed by Tom Begg. Mark?
Yeah, just a couple of points. I mean, first of all, the statistics are obviously up till March this year, just before the pandemic or the lockdown. I mean, one of the things that we're expecting to see, because we're continuing home working at the moment, we may see a shift when we get the kind of up-to-date figures in absence. And I mean, we're quite keen to look at the absence process, monitoring process, because clearly, if you're home working, you're less likely to phone in sick, because there's probably something you can do. But there'll be frontline workers who, you know, that option is not available to them. So we need to maybe look at we're doing that in a fairer way, and it may give us free up some time for more support in the frontline services when they face issues. I mean, also just to say in terms of mental health, I share your comments about that, Councillor Steele, because it's something that we are focusing on. Unison has put out information to its members and guidance, and we're providing support services to members whose mental health is suffering, and we're seeing that already. I sit on the COSLA WIG group, the Workforce Issues group, and we're about to launch a video clip which is to be used across local authorities around this issue, and some guidance is going to come out about how we may support our colleagues, not just in terms of an employer, but how colleagues can support each other, and particularly those who are home working, to continue that contact and having dialogue on a regular basis between our teams, so that they don't become, isolated workers in a sense. So I do share that, but we are working, I know we're working with HR on the absence monitoring. I think that these things will be key features from the trade union side.
Couldn't agree more. Councillor Begg?
Thanks, Andy. Two little points. On 5.1 in the chart there, I assume that the days lost in the second column is actually the target.
Days lost in the first column is the actual days lost per full-time employee.
I'm thinking that should be the target.
Well, the first column, 3.23, is the first number there. That's from March of last year. And then the next one reading across is from March of 2019, 3.05. And then there's a variance between the two. So
I've got it. So what you're doing is showing a variance between the two periods. All right, I'm thick. Forget that.
No comment. Your second point.
Next point, and I'll likely just as stupid in this one, 7.8. 905 appointments. It likely wasn't 905 individuals, nor was it maybe 80 people. Is there a sort of figure as to how many people are making these appointments?
Councillor, I would need to look into that detail and get back to you on that.
Is it an unreasonable question?
No, not at all, because in some cases somebody could have 2 or 3 appointments with, they've had initial appointment and then there'll be a course of appointments after. So we need to look into that to see how many individuals actually attended.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gents, if there are no more questions on the absence reports, we agree to note the report and move on to item 6, which is the details of grievances. Is it yourself again, Graham?
Good afternoon, convener. It's Ruth here. Just to give a wee update, the purpose of this report is to give the board an update on the number of grievances and the different stages across the services. As you can see from the papers, the total at the moment that we're sitting at is 11 across all the services, and you can see the different stages that there is within these. What we would say is that the HR, the unions and the services work together closely when there are any concerns or issues raised by any employees, in order that we can try and get a resolution to whatever these issues are, so that there's no need for any escalation. And what we have noticed in looking at the analysis of some of these, there's a lot of issues sometimes around relationships. And to support that, we have an accredited mediation team within HR that are able to support these situations where we can do our utmost to mediate with the relationship issues and hopefully get a resolution with that.
Thank you, Ruth. There's a storm of biblical proportions running over Johnston just now, so if I disappear, it's probably because my connection's been flooded out, but fingers crossed that doesn't happen. I don't have any questions down, and I don't see any hands raised. If there are no questions on the grievance statistics, we agree to note that report and move on to item 7, which is agency workers. It'll be either Ruth or Graham.
Thank you, convener. It's Ruth. Yes, an update for the board in the number of agency workers being utilised across the services. As you'll see, the current figure, the total figure, is sitting at 185. From previous reports that I've brought, we've always got a kind of fairly large number at health and social care, but as a result of the pandemic, as you could imagine, there's a spike there, but there's also a spike in environment and infrastructure around the cleaning area. If you've got any questions about what's happening in these areas, we've got members of these services here that can respond if you've got any specific questions or concerns.
Okay, I don't have any intimations that anyone wishes to come in at the moment. It's obviously the figures going up, but it's what it is. As the saying goes nowadays, there is.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, if no one wishes to come in on that, can we agree to note that report? And we'll move on to item 8, which is general issues related to COVID-19. Mark, are you coming in on this?
Yes, I think just we put this on just to kind of record just across the board about the collaborative working, because it's not just been in the key frontline areas. We've been working with our HR colleagues, and I think there's been an enormous amount of work done around schools. The difficulties around the blended learning, getting that put in place, and then a change a government change in direction. We had to very quickly turn that around. And obviously there's been a lot of challenges along the way. But, we've been able to sustain employees, have been able to sustain good attendance, and, we've managed to kind of deal with most of the issues that came up as and when they were required. I mean, there's been an enormous amount of work done. I don't think we've worked as collaboratively as we have in the last 6 months as we have over a number of years. Because, heads of service, directors, and the chief executive made themselves available when required, and we've worked through many of the challenges that we've been facing. And I know that, with the Anne over at Environmental and Infrastructure, I attended the centre at Castlehead early on, and in fact, we helped out at Castlehead. And, the fact that the head of service turned up on site herself and mucked in was appreciated by the workforce very early on in this pandemic. I think that set a good scene for how we're going to work, working together. That it calmed a lot of the concerns that the workers had when they seen that happening. Even in social care, there were some difficulties at the very outset. They were being swamped with having to get PPE in, and there was delays through that process. But largely, we've worked very well together, and I think there are lessons to be learned for us all about how we take matters forward and the challenges. I suppose the biggest thing for me coming out of COVID is the deficit that the local authorities are facing. The money's been spent in good faith, and I'm the chair of local government in Scotland, so this is something very close to my heart. When you hear that, the spend on that alone, COVID alone, is 736 to 39 million, and we are pursuing the Scottish Government to say that money needs to come into local government. We can't face a deficit of close to £1 billion if you factor in the pre-COVID deficits and what our ALIOs and our leisure trusts are facing. And I'm aware that there has been a fiscal flexibility paper being put to the Scottish Government. I do think it needs to go much further. I don't think payment holidays are the answer for local government. I think we do need to push together to make sure that we get our community services properly funded and that we get recompense for the expenditure we had during COVID. And I fully appreciate it's not just a solely Scottish Government issue. There's obviously a Westminster element to that. And Unison certainly is at the forefront of taking that case forward to make those arguments. I think locally, there has been a lot of good work. And just in schools, because of the concerns around it, and the pressures that we're under, and that even that short space of time between June and August, to get those schools open took an enormous amount of work. And I know that the elected members have already shown their appreciation to the workforce and the staff for putting that in place. I think it does need to go much, we do need to record that in a more significant way, because, they have come in very anxious times, and our social care workers, they've been out there from day one. They faced the virus head on, and it's undoubted that the services we provide in local government have saved thousands of lives in this community. And I think there's a lesson here about public services, because I've been fighting for local government all my working life, and we're not always seen as the sexy service of public services, let's say, but we were the first responders to this. And a lot of other services, like the health service, are starting to get back to some kind of normality and dealing with backlogs. We're still in the thick of it, and we're still at the front line, dealing with this issue. And I hope that that's taken on board, as we go forward. But I think we do need to work collaboratively to ensure that the work of local government services during this is highlighted at the very highest levels across not just in Scotland, but across the UK.
I'll be happy to write to Boris and confirm your points, Mark. No, it's fair points you're making, and even in a wider context, remember my family working retail, and shop workers too have been, well, let's not get too pejorative, but they haven't exactly been paid a king's ransom, and they haven't been treated very well. So maybe out of every bad thing, something positive might come in the future. I see a hand up from Councillor Patterson.
Many thanks, Chair. To echo much of what Mark was saying there, obviously in my role as convener education and children's services, it was a particularly challenging time for the service, and much has been made in the media, as often is the case, about the teaching staff, but what maybe has been forgotten a bit is the work that was put in by the support staff, many of whom are Unison members, in getting us back to school, because without them we wouldn't have got back to school, we wouldn't be back at school just now. So it's not just about the teaching staff, which is normally where the media focus, but that's just the nature of politics in the media sometimes. But I'm putting record my thanks, and I take the point that it can't just be one words. And I suppose I'd like to clarify the administration is open to looking at what can be done to more significantly recognise the workers. But as Mark also pointed out, as things stand at the moment, we have a gloomy financial outlook. And I'm pleased to hear that Unison are leading the campaign at both a UK and Scottish level. Certainly, I will be making the case when I attend COSLA, whenever that may be. Once we get back to that, local government can't be forgotten. We were the first, as responders, we were the first, and we had to enact an awful lot of Scottish Government guidance on their behalf that they came up with, which is fine. That's the nature of it. But we can't just be forgotten when it comes to the budget being set next year, because times were challenging before this. I fully acknowledge that. To say they're challenging now is a massive understatement. If we don't see some kind of uplift in the local government settlement, it'll be an extremely challenging year next year as well, but for a completely different reason. It won't be COVID we'll be worried about next year. It'll be pounds and pennies that'll be worrying us. So that message is understood certainly by the councillors, and I share Mark's, I suppose, being a councillor that you aren't at the public relations side of government, but as we've found out over the past kind of few months, it's a very important side. Many of the people that came to or contacted me over the course of the pandemic with various issues were coming for the first time they'd ever been near any elected member of any description, and they were totally lost in what was going on, and you were having to maybe act as councillor, MSP and MP all at once, because the last thing you want to do is turn around and tell somebody that's not my job, away and contact your MSP. So certainly I take your point as well, Mark, that the councillors have found out over the past few months our work remit grew slightly, but the collaborative work that was on show has been great, and if we can take that collaborative work and stick with it post-COVID, I'd be really excited about what we can achieve as a council. That's all I really have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Begg.
Mark, can I just add to what Jim's just said? Is you've said a way of recognition. Had you something in your own mind? Obviously, we want to get cross-party support on this. And what was in your mind?
We're slightly veering out of the remit of the JCB here, gentlemen.
Yes, I know, but he raised it as part of his unison point.
Fire away, Mark.
Are you leaving it to us to come up with an idea?
I think it's too complex and too much to go into detail. I mean, there's a number of things that I want to see coming out of this. I mean, and I'm making representations to obviously officers of the council on in various fronts. I mean, some of it is financial, but some of it's not. Some of it's about looking at the way we work, the way we move forward, and a lot of that's still to happen, Councillor. But I'm just saying, I was just making the point that the workforce has responded tremendously, and I know that the council officers will take that on board as we're going forward. So I mean, I think it's very complex because it's different things for different groups that I would be looking at going forward, and some of it is just making different decisions about the way we're structured and the way that we organise. So I'd probably not get into too much detail about it here, but I will be making representations in the next few days and weeks.
Can I just add that I had to go over to Germany for a family funeral, but while I was over there, I was over for 4 weeks to console my daughter. But what I was finding was that I was getting excellent support from all levels of the council to get things done at a distance, and I have been most impressed at all levels of the council as to what has been done.
Thank you for highlighting that, Councillor. If we have no other people wishing to come in on this item, I think we'll note that item and move on to the next one, which is social care, rest breaks and facilities. Mark again?
Yeah, I mean, I've really exhausted all avenues on this issue, and I want to put in record, first of all, that there has been progress over the last 2 months on this issue, but there hasn't been sufficient progress. And because the winter months are closely upon us, and given the difficulties around the COVID pandemic, I think this is something I need to bring here. I mean, I have had discussions with HSCP, I've had discussions with HR and health and safety who have come in and tried to assist in resolving this. I've even written to the Chief Executive and to David Lease. And there has been some progress, but the reality is this has been an issue that's been ongoing for a number of years, where home care workers, particularly care home workers, have had to congregate at street corners or outside of shops to share scheduling information, organise their workload, and often without any toilet or water, access to drinking water or toilet facilities. And just during the pandemic, when we've been visiting some of those workers, because they're isolated workers in a sense, we've been out to see them. When I went to one situation in Lockfield, where they were in a car park where 5 cars drew up, and they were drug dealing in that car park, where that was the only availability for our workers, our members, to have access to a break. Now, there has been, they've now started to put in some of the shelter complexes. And just to give an example, the shelter complex in the Lockfield area, the workers were locked out of that, and they were told they couldn't access that for various reasons. And eventually we got a toilet facility there, but only in the last few weeks. There is a difficult situation, but we do need to address the issue, because our members are still on to us on a daily basis. I'm about to communicate with the members over issues around social care, but this is an issue that I need progress on, and it's going to need some investment, because we can't have workers in an area where they don't have access to toilets or drinking water. And just to give an example of the Lockfield one, and I use that as an example, the facility that's now been made available to them is the Hunter Hill care home. The difficulty with that is that it's over the other side of the hill from Lockfield, and the staff originally were told that they could use the back car park. Now they've got access to the actual building. The difficulty is they only get half hour for their break, and they've been told that the travel is more. There's only one vehicle in that area, so they're walking between Lockfield and the Hunter Hill care home, and they've been told that that won't be scheduled into their working time, that will be part of their break time, the walking. So these things are not sufficient. These are not acceptable for us, and I'm bringing it here really because I need to see what fundamentally what is wrong, and getting proper provisions put in place. The other thing is that the workers have only been issued with 2 uniforms, and many are split shift workers. And you can imagine during the pandemic they're having to use 2 uniforms a day. Given that most of them have been working more than their normal working time because they've been covering, that means almost every day they're having to wash both uniforms in order to make them available. So there are issues that the members are bringing to us, but predominantly in the break issue, I want it resolved once and for all. And I appreciate, and I know Shauna's on, and there has been progress made, and Shauna, since she came in, has made huge steps and inroads here, but it's just not ready yet. And we need to be ready for the winter months, because we cannot allow our members to walk in the streets and not having access to these facilities. But in the dark nights and in the dark mornings, it's just not acceptable. And they're vulnerable. And just in the Lockfield situation, we were congregating outside the round street shops. They were asked by the police to move from there because there was someone being surveillance by the police who was suspected of sex offences and just hadn't been to court yet, and the police moved them on. So we're talking about situations where it's just not acceptable for that to be happening, and it's been quite a vulnerable situation. As I say, we've been everywhere. It's the long-term issue, but I hope by the winter, and raising it, we'll be able to get it resolved once and for all.
Thank you, Mark. Shauna, are you wanting to come in on this?
I think I probably should come in on this. I mean, Mark is correct. There was a long-term and has been a long-term issue in terms of downtime for the staff and where they would go. When I came into post at the end of December, I moved to allow the staff to use the facilities within the extra care units and within sheltered housing and within the care homes that are scattered across the Renfrewshire area. Our difficulty with that is, as Mark says, they're not all completely centrally located. We still have quite high levels of walking staff in that they walk from house to house in their locality and in their runs. And some of the areas don't have particularly well-sourced public buildings that we can actually access. So when COVID came along, the impact of COVID was significant because we had to close all of the care homes, all of the extra care housing and the sheltered housing down to non-essential visitors. And that meant that the care at home staff were almost instantly excluded from those establishments. So we have worked over the last few months to get, there are now 6 locations across Renfrewshire, but they don't cover all of the areas, and we are continuing to look to see what we can do. So we are using a variety of buildings. So I've used all of the daycare buildings have been opened and handed over. We're in negotiation just now to open up a further daycare building, and that is the last daycare building that I have to use. So some of our difficulties are to do with the lack of public buildings that are available. And by public buildings, I don't mean supermarkets or car parks or anything like that. I mean buildings that they could go in, that we can hire a room in, and they can use in terms of facilities. But that has proved fairly challenging over the period. And Mark is right to be frustrated by it, but that frustration is shared within the service in terms of trying to get access to buildings.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McNaughton.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, this is an issue that has been raised with us in this board in the past, and well, it was reported there was significant progress. Clearly, COVID adds another layer of difficulty on in this case, and I would hope that we can address some of those. But some of the issues that Mark has raised could be sorted today. The issue about extra time walking between these places might only be a temporary fix, but all that is agreeing the extra time. In other cases, it's much more difficult to provide facilities, and that might take a bit of time. But there's some things that can be done now and should be done now.
So I'm more than happy to look at the rotas on the uniforms. That's the first time that that's been raised with me. More than happy again to issue additional uniforms. There's no blockage on additional uniforms. We do have some back stocks. We may need to order more, and I see that Mike has raised his hand. Mike is one of the senior managers within Care at Home who may be able to provide further detail if you would wish, Chair.
Thank you. Mike, the floor's yours.
Yes, with regards to uniform, we had an issue with our supplier, and at the start of COVID, we made the decision that we were going to issue each carer with an additional 3 sets of uniform so that we could address all the washing issues. Unfortunately, the supplier wasn't able to come up with those deliveries for us, so we've been waiting for them to have stock of material back in so that they can produce. Now, I caught up with our customer business support colleagues last week, and I believe that material is now in, so that we have an order outstanding which will be supplied ASAP so that we can supply our carers with the additional uniforms required.
Thank you for that, Mike. Okay, so they're en route. I suppose all I can say is I'm perfectly happy to take this to administration leadership and see what we can add to it, if we can provide anything that would be able to help. Obviously can't guarantee anything because I'm not in that position, but I'm certainly happy to take it away. I appreciate the conversations are ongoing offline between HSEP, HR, union representatives, and we'll certainly do anything we can to facilitate that. That sounds like a horrific problem, it really does. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I can think of an answer to it, but it certainly is one that's going to have to be answered, because I'm tempted. I lean towards Mark's position on it. You can't have staff being exposed to that, you really can't. Does anyone else wish to come in on this before we move on? Just make absolutely sure it's very important. Nobody else. Okay, so we'll note that item on the agenda and move on to the final one, which is a Eunice one again, which is homework working expenses during the pandemic.
Yeah, Councillor, thanks for that. And I think that I've raised this with the Chief Executive, and I mean, she has written back saying it's something that's been considered. I just wanted to flag it up here today as well, because we're now 6 months almost into the pandemic. I mean, it's inevitable that a lot of workers who weren't contractually obliged but had to very quickly move to home working. That is the first one. And there has been recent Scottish Government guidance issued on this issue, where the Scottish Government are asking employers to pay the the non-taxable amount of up to £6 per week for home workers. Most authorities are trying to get their employees to claim it through taxation, which then puts them on a self-assessment process. It means they don't get the £6, they get approximately 121 or 124 at best. And I think that given that local authorities in their cost analysis presented a paper to the Scottish Government that said that the savings through the new working arrangements during COVID are resulting in an £80 million saving this financial year, then I think that it's reasonable that the employer pays the expenses that are within the HMRC guidelines retrospectively to the workforce who are at home and have been incurring costs. Now, I mean, I've not had anything to indicate that that's not going to happen here, but I think that now we're 6 months into it, we do need a decision to be taken, and we would look for that to be put to position, given that workers are incurring costs for the additional heating, electricity, and the working from home. The other expenses that I'm raising today are around things like laundry for our frontline workers who have had additional, uniforms having to be washed, and particularly at the start of lockdown where there was limited transport. And we had some workers that we spoke to were working for the first 2 hours for nothing because they had to take taxi switch from their house to the location. And I think that there is obviously there's a lack of break facilities, the normal shops, etc., weren't available to the workforce. So you're asking that the expenses are looked at and what employee may have incurred and that's applied. These are expenses in order to do their job that they've incurred, that I'm asking that it's retrospectively applied. And the Scottish Government has issued a guidance on this and has recommended that to employers, that's what's paid. Now, I appreciate there's been a reluctance across employers in Scotland to consider this and trying to put people towards HMRC. But the reality is, we're asking low-paid workers, and particularly in social care, the laundry thing, to go through a complex process for, a very small amount of money. And I don't think that's potentially fair. So I know that the Chief Executive is looking at it in the Director of Finance, but I think it's something I would like, some political backing to it, that it's reasonable to have expenses that you've incurred recompensed to reflect the fact that we're running council services from people's homes, residential homes. And I think that that's important as an employer that we set an example. And I think that Renfrewshire should try and lead the way in this and encourage other employers across Scotland and the local government to do the same.
Thank you. Wouldn't necessarily disagree. It is fair to point out that although we're 6 months into this, we're only really getting to the point where the nose is creeping above the waterline to try to address wider issues of this nature. But could you just clarify the issue you mentioned about taxis there, Mark? I didn't quite follow it. People having to go.
What I was saying is we selected a group of workers across Renfrewshire that we were speaking to and how they were getting to work. That was one of the things that Unison was tracking. And because there was a lack of bus provision, a lot of services were taken off very early on in the lockdown, or they didn't want to travel because obviously there are risks for social care workers to travel in buses. So a lot were taking taxis if they had no transport themselves to their work, and that wouldn't be their normal mode of transport. And in some cases, we identified some workers that the cost of the taxi to and from work was actually meant the first 2 hours of their work. In some cases, they're working for nothing, in their normal transport provision. So that's it's just additional expenses that workers have incurred as a result of COVID. And as I do point out, I mean, this is a registered fact that councils have recorded an £80 million saving in the new ways of working, and I think that's important because what I would have liked to have seen in the fiscal flexibility paper is some of that being reinvested back into the workforce and the overall cost of COVID. Because these are, the workers incurred the costs, although the councils saved that money.
Yeah. Yes, fair point. Aye. Is there anyone from the Chief Exec Service that could speak to this? Or are we just really flagging it up for? I'm not seeing anyone. Oh, Raymond.
Thank you, Convener. Mark, we haven't had a chance to catch up in the last couple of days, but Convener, there has been a decision made by our chief officers in this respect, just very, very recently, and it does follow suit with other councils across Scotland in terms of signposting people to HMRC to claim not just homeworking allowances, but people can claim tax relief on uniforms and equipment and mileage and other things. It's not just homeworking. And I do understand Unison's position in terms of how complex self-assessment is. We absolutely get that. But the council, we have made a decision that's what we will be communicating to employees in terms of that signpost to HMRC. And there's some reasons for that. One is obviously some of the cost. And I know Mark's view it in terms of the big savings that some employers are making nationally just now. I think we have at any one point roughly 2,000 odd home workers at home. And if we pay home workers at a tax-free amount of up to £6, and I'm not saying they're not entitled to it, but not everybody will be out of pocket through homeworking. And then that begs the question of what do we do if we pay home workers an allowance? What do we do for the frontline workers in terms of some kind of parity? And that was some of the kind of thought process that we walked and we went through. We know that obviously, in fact, I'm not aware of any council that's actually paying the £6 or up to £6 homeworking allowance just now. And we know it's something that's been discussed nationally as well. But that was our position just as of a few days ago, convener. Thank you for the update. Mark, your hand's back up again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely astonished to hear that, to be honest with you. I mean, to send workers down the HMRC route and a self-assessment route is a complex route. And when you're on that cycle, it's very difficult. In fact, near impossible to come back off it. And the reality is that for a home worker situation, instead of getting £6 a week, you end up through taxation with £1.21. And the fact is that these are workers predominantly who are not contractually obliged to work from home. They did it in order for the council to run their services and for services to run during this pandemic. And I think that's, and I'm not happy with that decision at all, as you can imagine, Councillor Steele. I mean, these workers have acted in good faith, and I don't accept that, and what some employers have been putting forward, although this hasn't been the argument here so far, some are saying, well, you're not travelling to work. How you get to work and back is your business. The fact is that if council wants to run its services, my view is that the council should pay all those services to be run. It shouldn't come out the worker's pocket. I mean, the workers have got a number of things, electricity, a whole range of things that they're now incurring costs. We've been doing some work with some of our members and looking at bills, comparing bills for last year with this year and what that's been. And the £6 actually wouldn't even touch it. It's just the tax-free amount. That's why we're asking for it. And the Scottish Government gave clear guidance to employers. If the public sector employers aren't going to even honour that, what chance have we got of doing anything in any of the other sectors of society? I'm not happy with this at all. And it puts us in a very difficult position because it's something that our members have been quite passionate about. And I think that given the inconvenience of having to get their home installed with various pieces of IT and get set up for all of this, this was a lot of disruption in households, taking up space. Part of the saving that the councils have made is around rates because the buildings are unoccupied. That's because you're occupying somebody's dining room, bedroom, or whatever it may be. So I don't accept that at all. And I mean, I think that's something that I'm really not happy about at all. I mean, I think the workers should be recompensed for at least the minimum that was recommended by the Scottish Government as a way forward. And I mean, workers are, at the moment, they're working in good faith because they're not contractually obliged to do so. Work from home. And I think the laundry thing, and these are social care workers who have been at the front facing of this COVID pandemic, who are getting into households where people have had COVID, very anxious, haven't increased the number of the laundry. We know the issue with accept what Mike's saying about the uniforms, but that many members have had to wash that a lot more in order to do their job. So I do think, I feel quite strongly about this, and I think there will be a response from the joint trade unions on it, I'm pretty sure.
Thank you. Councillor McNaughton, you're wishing to raise an issue?
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of valid points raised there. I'd be interested in finding out what other councils are doing and what, in particular, what COSLA's view on on this is I don't think we're in a position to take a decision on that. It's not within our particular remit, but I note what our officers have decided with that regard. I'd be much more interested in what COSLA is saying about it, and if that could be fed back.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It tends to be, I'm coming to this cold, obviously, Mark, this is the first it's been raised to my attention. Basically, anything that gets put in front of an elected member just now, you're waiting for funding solutions from Edinburgh, from London. And until we know where we stand, it's incredibly difficult to actually say yay or nay to anything. But you knew that anyway, I don't have to tell you that. Mark, you get your hand up first and then Raymond.
Yeah, just to say again, I mean, in terms of COSLA, because I sit, Council Norton, I sit on the COSLA Work Group who issued advice, and what they did was they put out both sets to leave it to the employer. They didn't give it the HMRC guidance, they gave it the Martin Lewis website address, believe it or not, and asked councils to look that up. And the other one was, or to pay the HMRC amount. You know, I saw the draft, I saw the guidance that went out because I was in the WIG group when I was arguing for this point. This exact point, but that's what they did. They issued the Martin Lewis website for councils to look up, or to pay the HMRC amount. The Scottish Government did issue specific homework and guidance, and in that it does specify that they're asking employers to pay the amount, which I did share with the council when it was published.
Gordon?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate what Mark had said just in front of me. That was all. Just in reply to
Okay, so is there any potential for continued talks on this, or are you saying that's the decision being made?
I'll take this back to our chief officers from today, Convener, and Mark. We can maybe catch up after that if that's okay.
That's something. I'm trying to avoid this meeting starting with us all praising frontline staff and then ending up with saying no, you can't. It's at all possible so to do. However, I do understand and appreciate the position that the finances are in. Does anyone else wish to raise anything on this issue? Just double check. I think we've covered it. All right. That's all I have.
Could I come in just now? The next meeting of the JCB is due to be held on the 11th of November. And as you'll be aware, the constitution of the JCB indicates that we're supposed to have 5 meetings per year. This year, we've not had, this is the first meeting, and we'll have the meeting in November. Obviously, in the circumstances, it's not going to be possible to have the 5 meetings, and I just want to note that in the minute that it's been agreed by management and the trade unions in the circumstances, which are exceptional, we're not able to have 5 meetings. Otherwise, you need to be meeting every 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay, thank you for organising that. That's understood. Thank you for that, and thank you all for coming along. And we'll see you on the 11th of November, if not before. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much.